Hello, everybody. Welcome back to an episode of the SOMM TV podcast. Today, I'm going to talk to regular show guest, Julia Coney, who is an expert on all things, but I think above more than anything else, bubbles. She can convert anybody to loving champagne. She makes me love it more every single time I have her on the pod. But before we get to this conversation, I want to remind you, the reason I'm talking to Julia is that our new Verticals episode starring Rudolph Peters from Pierre Peters Domain, which is a champagne house in Champaign, a grower producer, is airing on SOMM TV. It is up now, sommtv.com. This is a really cool one. It's the first one from France of the season. And if you drink champagne, or hopefully you've never heard of this wine, because this will open your eyes to a really good bargain for the quality and price and everything. I mean, it's really, and also a wonderful family. This is a very special one that goes back to my very first days of learning about wine, and I love them very much. I want to plug something else. We have something really special coming up on SOMM TV very soon. It is a live watch of A Year in Burgundy, the acclaimed film that takes place in Burgundy throughout the communes with Shakira Jones and Jill Zamorsky, Master Sommelier. The two of them are absolutely hilarious together, and all of the rehearsals we've done have been so great. There is a wine offering that comes with this. It's two amazing bottles of wine, a white and a red, from tiny producers, and you can get them nowhere else in the world other than sommtv.com/A Year in Burgundy. You want to get these wines. You still have time to order them for the event. sommtv.com/A Year in Burgundy. So that live watch masterclass is going to take place at 8 p.m. April 24th Eastern Time. You do not want to miss this. It will be recorded. So if you by chance miss the actual live airing of this, don't worry. Order the wines and you can still watch it on sommtv.com. sommtv.com is $49.99 for the year and $5.99 a month if you don't want to sign up for a year, which you should. That's a good deal. All right, without further ado, my friend Julia Coney is here to talk about bubbles and Rudolph Peters. Julia, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
You know, I'm always good. You tend to brighten my day, so whatever problems I had, I'm going to be past that after this conversation.
Oh, you make me feel so special.
You're also the hardest working person in wine, from what I can understand here. I keep trying to have you back on the podcast. You're the only one I get to do these crazy things with, like pairing Denzel Washington movies with wine and things like that. And I want more of you, but you are so busy. Before we get started talking about champagne, what the hell are you working on right now?
So I'm going to say this. I don't say it's busy. I say my life is full. So I think if I change the perspective and the wording, I don't seem as busy as I actually am. Of course, working on things, Black wine professionals, I still write about wine. I still like to talk about wine. And I'm also studying for my WSET 3. So I have a lot of moving parts going on. I work retail still. So it's kind of like about 6-7 jobs, but it's all fun.
Can I ask you a question? Do you consider yourself a sommelier?
No.
You don't consider yourself a somm at all?
No.
What do you consider yourself?
I consider myself, first, I'm a wine journalist. That's how I identify myself. Yeah. And then I am a person who founded Black wine professionals. But for me, I come to wine through words. I don't deal with inventory. When I think of somms, I think of like inventory and spreadsheets and, costs. I don't do that. So for me, I'm not a somm.
Interesting. At some point, I do want to have a big conversation with people, including yourself, about what a somm is. I'm actually trying to redefine that term because I look at it as a curator.
Oh, okay.
I mean, obviously, yes, there's inventory and all of those things, but I do think people who are curating things, not necessarily always wine, but mostly wine, that most don't know about, maybe it's a better cost, maybe it's some region you've never heard of. I look at that as a somm, and I want to later on, maybe when your schedule clears up in 2096, you and I can talk about what that is. But you're here for bubbles.
I'm here for bubbles.
It's your thing, right?
It's my top thing. Yeah, bubbles bring the party. I mean, come on. I mean, last night I was popping Pet Nat and listening to the Isley Brothers and Earth, Wind and Fire. So much fun.
I wish I was over in DC with you for sure. Bubbles are one of these things I never understand. You'll hear some people. It's not that they don't like them, but they have this myth like it gives them a headache or something like that. And I never quite understand where it comes from. Maybe because that doesn't affect me, but bubbles are one of those things that I don't turn them down. It's just whenever they're around, I want them. And if I have them, I'm drinking them. It's kind of one of those things.
Think about it. When you're looking at a glass and you see the bubbles and they're lifting, it's like your spirits rise at the same time as the bubbles are going up. You don't really see an unhappy person with a glass of bubbles in their hand. You just don't.
Yeah. I know that for me at least, and maybe this is because I have children, but I think the alcohol portion of drinking is kind of fun and I enjoy it. And I'm not abashed to say that I don't mind it, I don't want to get rip-roaring drunk, but a little buzz is comfy and it's nice and it's fun. Do you agree with me that there is a different kind of buzz from champagne and bubbles than there is from other things like sake and beer?
I personally do. Even I think there's a difference between that and like a heavier style red wine. Like I can drink bubbles like water. Like literally, like bubbles is still the same size bottle, but it just goes down faster. It just does.
But why does it feel different? I know this sounds crazy because it's alcohol and all of these things. I truly, and I'm not kidding, I wonder if any of the listeners agree with me on this. It feels different. If you drink a bunch of bubbles, the buzz or whatever you want to call it doesn't feel anything like. I look at sake and bubbles as two of the most unique buzzes you can get from an alcoholic beverage. They're totally different from each other.
Yeah, sake will knock me down.
You know?
Sake will knock me down.
Yeah.
I like sake, it doesn't like me back. Is what I do. But like when I think of bubbles, I mean, you can get a buzz, but like for most people, I think the buzz takes longer to get to in bubbles than any other thing.
Interesting. Yeah. It's one of those things that I think I don't know if this is a mental thing, but it's almost like, I don't want to say appropriate, but more appropriate to drink in the morning than something else. I mean, you don't drink a Zin on a Saturday morning at brunch. You might have a glass of bubbles with or you might have a mimosa.
Yeah, but you got to remember, you can't drink all day if you don't start in the morning, no matter what it is.
Oh, man, I can't wait to get out to DC and party with you. All right. So I guess, we have this, Verticals is kind of like my baby on SOMM TV. It's this series where, as you know, it goes through all these different families and producers and such. I think this is the very first one we've ever done with France, and that's because of COVID. But it's also a dear friend, a person I admire very much. And I know you love his wine.
Yes.
Which is Rudolph Peters from Pierre Peters. First of all, let's talk about him, and then let's get into the grower producer type thing and what's real, what's hype, where do you start, what's the difference between the big houses. I love your take on all this stuff. So let's start with Rudolph Peters and Pierre Peters. What are your thoughts? When did you first have this wine?
I discovered Pierre Peters in 2017 in Champagne. I didn't discover him here in the U.S. I discovered him in a shop in Cobb de Forum in Champagne in Lambs. And I remember just looking at it, and the guy told me, he said, just buy the bottle. He said, just buy the bottle. And then the next night, I was at Le Wine Bar in Champagne, and I was mentioning to Nicholas about Pierre Peters, and he said, I'm going to open a bottle so you can really understand. And he opened the bottle, and I remember he poured a glass of it, and my friend Claire and I tasted it. And I went, we'll just take the bottle. Thank you. It wasn't, and we had it that night. Then I started looking at his list. Like I knew about grower champagnes, but, understood like Charton Tillé, which we like to say was the first one that introduced growers into the U.S. in a way. But having that Pierre Peters there and then just looking through this book of all these small producers I had never heard of, I think that to me was that light bulb moment of like, okay, this is something different. This is unique in a way that I understand it tastes so different than something else I've had.
When I made SOMM 1, there was all this like real big hype around grower producers. Like that's what everybody wanted to find. They were all looking for new producers. They wanted to discover the next thing. How do you define what grower producer means? It's kind of a hip term, but it's a real thing. It's not like a fad or anything. So what is it?
To me, when I think of growers, especially people like Pierre Peters, they grow the grapes for other houses to make their champagne, if we're going to get that definition. But I also think it means small batch. I mean, basically, it could be like local. We think of food and farm to table. It's basically the same version in Champagne.
Just very, very provincial. Like they just make it right there.
Right there.
Yeah.
They don't make a lot of it either. So we have to say that. They make what they make. And if you can get your hands on it, you can. And if you can't, you can't.
Yeah, well, it's funny. It's not necessarily more expensive, though, which in a lot of cases, that is the case when there's lower production. The reason I wanted to do a Verticals on Pierre Peters is I think champagne can be very intimidating, not from a standpoint of drinking it. It's all delicious. I just mean from learning it. It can seem overwhelming. All the different regions and communes and villages. And, you have Pinot Meunier growing down here by the river, and you have Pinot Noir growing here and Blanc de Blanc.
And then you got over here Côte de Blanc, you got, Chardonnay, and the Chardonnay is different in the Valley de Marne.
And you fall into the Aube and your head explodes. But I mean, it's like, it's so much stuff. But I thought Pierre Peters was a really good entry point, but also a really advanced wine. So it's not like a simple thing, but a good entry point into the grower producer concept, where you could kind of like, and you can actually get a hold of this bottle in the US because some of these bottles you can't get. How would you recommend somebody takes a look at champagne and starts to understand it to figure out what they want to drink?
Well, I have to start with saying people need to realize if you don't work in the wine industry, you may not think this and understand. Champagne is wine. It is still wine at its core. It starts as a still wine. And I think we forget that because we're experiencing the bubbles. But I think looking at champagne and taking a chance, I think like with wine times, people don't want to take a chance. Champagne is something you want to take a chance on. You always want to be exploring it. And also one of the best ways to find these you're going to have to go to a small store. You're not going to find a lot of these Pierre Peters at your bigger, storefronts that's selling wine, beer, and spirits. You're just not.
I wonder why that is. Why not? I mean, is it just because they can't move it, or what's the reason?
They could definitely move it, but I think Pierre Peters depends on who you are. It's a hand sale. He doesn't have marketing, right? He doesn't have the marketing. He's not in a magazine. Yes, his rosé is associated with the celebrity, but technically he's not on the shelf that you recognize as being for champagne. If we're talking to hand sell it, we can say, hey, this man family has been making champagne here. It's so great. This is why it's interesting. It's a luxurious champagne. And when I say luxury, I don't mean in cost. I mean just in experience. It's a luxurious champagne.
Yeah. Do you think, for the verticals episode, just out of my own curiosity, do you think Pierre Peters is a good entry point into the grower champagne concept for people?
Yes. Yes.
Why so?
I think one, price point. You can find it on the internet. You can find it in small boutiques, and you can get your hands on it. So it's not...
Oh, yeah. You can go to the Vivino app right now and buy it right off of Vivino if you wanted to.
Yes, exactly. Because some of the ones like I may like and you may drink, you can't get those. They might be allocated to a certain store in a certain state. Yep. They don't ship to your state, or they just don't even make it that way. Yeah. Some champagnes really just don't even make it west. It's like they go to New York and stop.
Right. Well, New York does have a habit of gobbling up a lot of the wine that's supposed to go to me.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that. Though, and also I would imagine you being in the DC metro area, that's got to be. Mm-hmm. Do you guys get a lot of these great wines, or do you have to?
Oh yeah.
I would imagine East Coast. Yeah. You're fine. Yeah.
East Coast. Yes.
So when we talk about the grower champagne things, they sell their grapes and they make their own grapes, right? But the inverse is this big house.
Yes.
And I was kind of afraid making SOMM 1 and 2 that people were not giving. It's not that they're not successful. It's not they're not making a ton of money, but they weren't giving the credit to the artistry of what they have to do too. I'm curious what your thoughts are on the big houses as well, because I do think there's a great yin and yang. And I'm talking to you before we started recording. I think you said it perfectly. What are your thoughts on the big houses versus the little houses, and what's the difference?
Big houses, they're bigger wine. They make more champagne, right? But they also help these growers in a way when people who are exploring champagne and really trying to really understand nuances. I think a lot of people start with the big houses and they go into growers. You can't have one without the other. I mean, there's a place for the person who is wanting this bigger house and they want the name. And it's my job as like a journalist and a person who talks about it is to implore people to try other things. But you can't have the small without the big houses. And they serve a purpose. And in my opinion, that purpose is to get people to start thinking and drinking champagne in a different way. Think about the first wines you had, right? You branched out your wines.
Oh, yeah.
You can branch out your champagne. So in my mind, it's kind of the same concept.
It blows me away, though, the champagne, the kind of idea that vintages are different, obviously, especially when they have a vintage wine, but the aim to make it the same over and over and over again, year by year by year with these big houses.
Very hard.
Oh, my God. I think it's possible. I don't want to pigeonhole the whole audience. There's a lot of smart people who listen to this podcast, but the idea of keeping... Like Dom Perignon, they make so many bottles. But to think about how the quality control to try to make it always taste like Dom. They're trying to go for something, and that's through very selective blending. It's very complicated. I've been there. I've seen them do this, and it is an astoundingly difficult process, in my opinion. Obviously, they've mastered it. Is there a difference with grower champagne and the big houses in that there's more variance? Are they aiming for the same goal?
I think they're aiming for two different goals. That's my personal opinion. I think the goal of making it taste the same because you have people who may don't care about vintage variations, right? As where the growers, they're like, this is what it gave me. This is all I can make, and this is what I'm giving you. And you have to also be curious in understanding that you want to try something different as well. People are a creature of habit, right? If you taste a big house and then you taste a grower and it doesn't taste the same, you're going to I don't like that champagne. It wasn't good. It wasn't good in comparison to what? Something that you're used to. Every glass that I taste should taste different. I'm expecting it to taste different. I'm expecting something from Aube not to taste like Côte de Blanc, and that's okay. But that's me, though. Right? I always introduce people to growers with three people: Cedric Mousset, Chateau Tellet, and Pierre Peters. And that's where I go. And then I move into the Lalliers and the other small people. I want people to understand that range. And usually when I do that, they're like, oh, I understand. I liked it. And I had it with something as well. And also, too, champagne is seen as fancy. We need to, celebrate something. It's like Biggie, right? We drink champagne because we're thirsty. It's one of those things that we do. Don't wait for it. Working in retail, I tell people who really are getting into champagne, and I can say this, we don't sell big houses. We sell really small houses of champagne. And people who are really getting into it, I tell them to buy one champagne, have that taste it, make your notes, buy a different one 2 weeks later. So they can then understand the difference.
Well, I'll make sure to do that while I'm reading Word Up magazine.
That will be a good podcast episode.
Oh man, as Biggie Smalls that's my generation right there. Music, I was right. Yeah, it's still some of the best albums I own. All right, So when we talk about this is something that is endlessly fascinating. We're about to start a cooking competition show based on sparkling wine.
Oh wow, okay.
Called Sparklers. We're starting to film it up in Oregon in 3 days, and I am sweating hard about it. But one of the big things I would ask you: do you think you could blind taste different champagnes? I never see it done. People don't do it, and I'm curious why.
I will say this: yeah, I don't really see people doing it here. But when I went to Champagne in 2019, I saw people blind tasting champagne.
Okay, what was the reason? Why were they doing it? To call it or to learn?
They were just doing it to practice to see if they could taste one from the different regions, right? If they could taste. And also, I watched somebody blind taste champagne, and he even got the producer right.
Who was this? Throw this name out. Who is this person that deserves this amazing credit?
His Instagram is Ilo Vole. His name is Peter Crawford. He's out of the UK. He blind tasted champagne down to the grower producer. And wow. I was just blown away. And I said, well, how did you really be able to do this? And I was asking him and the other guys. He was like, I don't drink anything else but champagne.
Oh, there you go. Well, there's the answer. You give that guy a Chilean Carmenere, he's going to be screwed. Yeah.
Yeah. He said, I don't drink anything but champagne.
I want to know what tax bracket this guy's in.
It was amazing. But I think food and sparkling wine, I always try to tell people, I drink a lot of it with snacks, and I have my champagne that goes with Cheez-Its. I have my champagne that goes with Lay's potato chips.
You're going right into exactly what I want to ask you next. So let's talk about food and champagne. It's so easy that the usual suspects work great. What are the usual suspects with champagne or bubbles? I mean, in some cases, it doesn't have to just be champagne, but bubbles as a whole.
Oysters. Everybody's like oysters. If you're in France, they go foie gras, oysters.
Uh-huh.
That kind of typical. In America, now everybody's like champagne and fried chicken, right? I get it.
Yeah, that is actually good. Champagne and fried almost anything, in my opinion, works. Champagne and French fries is freaking great, too.
Yes.
What about caviar?
Yeah, caviar, but still caviar, creme fraiche, potato chip. You can do that. I like Blanc de Noir and Cheez-Its, plain regular Cheez-Its as a snack.
Blanc de Noir and Cheez-Its.
Yes.
Love this. Why Blanc de Noir? Why not Pinot-based wines? Why Chardonnay? What's the difference with Cheez-Its?
Blanc de Noir.
I'm sorry.
Pinot.
But why Pinot? I'm sorry, I said it backwards. Why Pinot and not Chardonnay? What's the, why?
I need more of that fruit. I need more of that structure. The Pinot's bringing a structure to handle the salt and the fake cheddar that's on the cheese, right? But if I'm doing Blanc de Blanc, and that's a range, right? If I'm doing Blanc de Blanc, a Brut Nature, I like plain Lay's because Lay's has more salt than Ruffles. But if I'm getting to a Blanc de Blanc at about 7% dosage, then I'm going to Ruffles.
Oh, this is great. I have found too, I'll say champagne, but it's kind of, I do mean the whole family of sparkling wines in a lot of cases. Mm-hmm. There's astounding differences, obviously, between Cava and Prosecco and champagne and sparkling in America and South America. But just for the purpose of this conversation, I do find sparkling wine or even just champagne from Champagne is one of the only wines I've seen you can literally go through an entire meal with. It could be a 10-course meal.
Yes.
And you can have steak, you can have dessert, you can have appetizers. I find sherry to be like this, but you have to be really into sherry. But sherry does have the range.
Yeah.
I would love to see more people approach champagne that way. There are savory aspects of it. You can have it with salad, which is really rare that wines can pair with a salad with vinegar. Mm-hmm. What are some of the...
Rosé and filet.
Rosé and filet. Oh, yeah. No,
Rosé, champagne, and filet.
I would eat that this second right now if I could have rosé and filet. What are some of the odder pairings you've had with champagne? Why does it work? Can you think of anything besides Cheez-Its?
Oh, you mean chips and things like that?
Anything. I don't know. Anything weird. I don't know.
One of my favorites is demi-sec and what's the, not licorice, but just hot.
Oh, hot tamales? Like the cinnamon ones? No?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. You like the little red ones?
Yes. The little red ones.
Interesting.
And demi-sec. Because remember, we're going with the sweetness. The demi-sec is giving you a little bit of sugar and it's going to help with the spice. Because that's why I pair demi-sec and Flamin' Hot Cheetos.
Oh, yeah. I know people who take those Flamin' Hot Cheetos and then they mash them up and they make them a rub. And they put them on ribs or chicken or whatever. And then they smoke them and they have them with champagne. I've heard of that before. That's...
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's actually an interesting call to think about wines that can hold up to spice. Because there aren't a ton. A lot of red wines, they get buried by spice. But you're right. I think bubbles, would you say drier the better or with some sugar to hold up the spice? You say with sugar?
It has to have some residual sugar. Like, it also depends on what spice we're talking, right? For me, like when I was in Louisiana last month, I had root because I need a little more sugar. I needed like the 12 grams of sugar to go with crawfish because it's crawfish season.
Oh, man, I wish I was there.
Yeah. This crawfish was like the kind, nose running spice.
Right.
You needed to go with that, right? But then I had an extra brute with boudin balls.
Boudin balls.
Right?
This is great. Sounds like a great lunch. This is heaven.
I'm Southern.
Yeah.
I'm always going to match the food I eat with champagne. So.
Yeah, that's great. How come people seem to have lost the respect for sweeter champagnes? I've always read that in the 1800s, now early 1900s, even during World War I and II, all the champagnes are sweet. Dry is kind of a
new concept,
a relatively new concept. Yeah. Why have we lost the taste for it? There's no respect for it, I feel like.
I think we lost the taste of more like sweet wines. Like, it's like, oh, sweet wines are bad, right? Sweet wines, and I always bring it back to truffles, right? Truffles, Alba, Italy. When we think of Alba, Moscato d'Asti, right? But we've had such bad Moscato in this country come over here, and people are like, I don't like sweet wine, it's horrible. And don't say I like sweet wine. But Moscato d'Asti pairs well with truffles, just like a sweeter champagne would pair well with truffles as well. It can run the gamut. So sweet wines are looked down upon as like, oh, I don't drink those sweet wines. And also, we're telling people, oh, don't drink sweet wine. A well-made sweet champagne to go with a savory or sweeter dish is a great pairing. It's just that you don't see a lot of it.
Yeah. No, see, I told you you're a sommelier. You just won't listen to me.
I'm not a sommelier. No, that's a skill set. I'm telling you. I just know.
Well, a lot of them would be happy to have the recommendations you're saying. One other quick question. The grapes, I think this is another confusing thing for people. And I don't know that it needs to be. Let's talk about the grapes that are used in champagne really fast.
Yeah.
And then let's talk outside of champagne, some other grapes that you've seen in sparkling that you think are undervalued or underrated that make great bubbles. Let's start in champagne. What do they use?
Okay. Well, champagne, mainly is Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier. Those are the main grapes, right? You can't have Pinot Blanc, you can't have Pinot Gris, you can't have Arbonne, and you can't have Petit Meslier. Everybody's not having those, right? People can put them in, but champagne is known for the three powerhouses: Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier.
I wonder why those three ended up being the ones. Do you think it has to do with marketing, or they're just better grapes? Or, obviously, we all love those grapes, but
no, it's just the plantings and where they are and the way, it's farming. They just produce some of the best wines. I mean, the others can be finishers, but they just don't produce the quality that's needed to be made. Yeah.
And those other grapes that a lot of people haven't heard of, what do they do to the wine when you use a little bit of them? What's the quality? What do they change?
You're talking texture now, and then you're talking flavor components. And sometimes, like if you're cooking, I call it when you cook something and you're like, it just needs a little something, something.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
you know
definitely.
what it is?
No, for sure.
That's what they're doing. They're just adding a little bit extra.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then for the nerds listening, how do you feel about oak on champagne?
Oak in the hands of the right chef de cave is great. It's just kind of like oak in any other sense. They're still a winemaker, right? Oak can be great. It goes back to how they're making it, right? I think oak gets a bad rap just like sweet wines do.
Yeah.
It's not the oak's fault. It's the person that's handling the oak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's good examples. Like I know Krug uses some new oak, and their wine.
Who's turning down Krug?
Not me. It's one of our partners on Sparklers, and I'll tell you right now, I may have just done the thing so I could just drink Krug.
Yes, exactly. So oak is not bad.
No.
Yeah.
That's good. I like hearing you say this. It's important that people understand that a Twitter post about oak is not the world of oak. I mean, it's so important. It's the same as
I see those and avoid those. Just like keep scrolling. Just like, nope.
Yeah. I mean, for me, this is going to be a weird analogy, but it's like using slow motion in a film. As a director, you can really use it all the time. And all of a sudden, eventually you end up with Armageddon. But if you use just enough, it can. I actually like Armageddon, so I don't mean that negative. But if you use enough, just the right amount, it accentuates. It makes a scene more impactful. And that to me is the analogy in filmmaking: is that oak is to be used for an effect, not as the base of the entire product.
Exactly.
Well, I want to close out this pod with just a kind of thought of what should people try besides Pierre Peters, which they should absolutely try. What are some champagnes and bubbles within an relatively affordable price range people can start with, and why?
Okay, so I'm going to start, say, an entry level roughly between 40 to 45, is if they can find it called Le Menil, Lemesnil. They're a group of growers who came together to make their own champagne. Each one couldn't do it on their own, but they came together to make a champagne.
Le Menil.
Le Menil. I would say Lallier.
Lallier, yes.
Lallier is an entry point in the IE part of champagne. I would definitely say Charton Tellet. Really, we're talking 55, maybe and under, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a great starting point. Also, I would say you have a lot of champagnes that have half bottles. I know people who love half bottles. I would say you have La Caraval that's half bottles. You have Laurent Perrier that are half bottles. If you don't want to buy a full bottle, some people may not want to open a full bottle. That's on them. I like big bottles, and I cannot lie. So I would say start with a couple of those. And then you start branching out and go, oh, what I didn't like about this? Or what I really like, but I want to explore more. Okay, well, that's from this area. Okay, well, I want to find more champagnes from that part.
Love it. What about some champagne method, which means secondary fermentation in the bottle, that are not from champagne?
Okay, are we talking like...
to some people, $45 is a lot of money.
Yeah.
That's a birthday for them, and I respect that. So what about something around 2025?
I would say what I really like is Reventos E Blanc.
Reventos E Blanc.
E Blanc. They're not part of the DO of Cava. They broke away, but they make a beautiful rosé and a Blanc de Blanc that is just, I think for retail, maybe $26. It's really phenomenal. I will say if you really want to have some fun with some things that are bubbles, that are champagne method, Trevery Cellars out of Washington State, they make a champagne method Syrah.
Whoa. What's the color of it?
It's deep purple. It is delicious, though.
Wow.
Yes. Yes. So I would say you can go that route. Right now, a lot of the producers from Italy, Prosecco Rosé has been approved with Pinot Nero, Pinot Noir. It has Pinot Noir and Glera a little bit. So you can find something on the market. And I would say if you can find it at a small boutique store, support a local shop.
I love that. Julia, it is always such a pleasure to have you on here.
Thank you.
The world needs more. I wish you could clone yourself. Then you could be on the pod more often.
Yes. Well, guess what? I'm getting my little shots, and so the world is going to slowly open up, and then I can make my way out to California to see you guys.
I would love that. I mean, you're going to find yourself in as much content as we can convince you to be in. So I do adore talking to you. It's great. So next time, you and I will offline about what we want to talk about next. But I cherish this stuff. Thank you, Julia. It means a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And please check out Julia Coney on Instagram, on Twitter. She's not just a good follow. You have to follow her. She is fantastic. Very educational. Cares about the right stuff in the wine business. Really important. Julia, what's your handle? I'll call you out.
Julia Coney.
Just Julia Coney?
Yeah.
At Julia Coney. JuliaConey. Follow her, everybody. And don't forget to go to SOMMTV.com. This is, this has been our sort of life's work. $49.99 for the year for all this content. I promise you. At least I think it's worth it. I try to promise you. Also, don't forget, SOMMTV.com/A Year in Burgundy. Shakira Jones and Jill Zamorsky doing a masterclass live watch of A Year in Burgundy. It is going to be so many great things you can learn, and you can drink along with them. All right, everybody. Please be safe, okay? Talk soon.